into a situation where they don't bear any relevance. Let's discuss now. We have associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard, and CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official, Philip Mudd. It's good to have all of you here on this important morning. Phil Mudd, the word unmasking is being used in a very nefarious way now. It's almost like you should say it in an evil whisper. They were unmasking. What is unmasking, and when is it right and when is it not?
Well, let me take you into this situation. Going back to the fall, as you know, there's a lot of stories swirling in Washington, including at the White House, about Russian interference in the election. Obviously, the president appropriately asks his national security advisor, Susan Rice, to look into how the government should respond. On January 2nd, President Obama announces sanctions against the Russian and expels Russian diplomats. I've got to judge, based on what we've seen in the past 24, 48 hours, that Susan Rice is getting intelligence not only about how the Russians are responding to those sanctions, but about communications between the Russians and Trump officials. So let's cut to the chase. What is she supposed to do? She's responsible for implementing the sanctions policy of President Obama, and she sees intelligence that says person number one, American number one, is talking to Russian officials about this issue. She either says, I have the responsibility to know who's talking to the Russians about the president's policy, or I'm not going to know. She goes forward and says, I'm going to unmask those names. Not only appropriate, but it's her responsibility to know this. This is a smokescreen by the White House. By the way, Sean Spicer knows about as much about intelligence as I know about ballet. This is dime a dozen what the National Security Advisor should be doing. She's got to know how people are trying to impede the President of the United States from implementing sanctions, and she's got to know who's talking to the Russians. It's that simple, Chris.
Okay, so A.B., that is quite different than how the White House is depicting this situation and how right-wing media is depicting this situation. Let's listen to Bill O'Reilly, who last night addressed the angle the White House likes.
This story is starting to explode, trying to dwarf the Russian thing, because the Russian thing's been going on for a while, and there's no evidence. Everybody says there's no evidence. Even Schiff, the Democrat ranking on the House Intel Committee, says there's no Russian thing that we've seen. But the Susan Rice,
he didn't quite say that, but he came close. This means we're going to have dual track investigations in both houses at a minimum, and that this whole question of the gathering of intelligence, surveillance, and unmasking of American names is going to be a significant part of it. And I think
it's now broken out.
There's no way to turn back from that now.
Plenty of way to turn back from it. It's by keeping the facts straight of how you have general issues versus you have specific ones of concern here, A.B. Stoddard, about how this was done. Do you see this being reported on legitimately in that clip and others that are coming out of the conservative media?
Well, I do think that the leaking is the issue, and the leaking is a problem no matter who the administration is, which party controls it. The Intelligence Committee has a code of conduct, and they're not supposed to be leaking that stuff. And the wide dissemination of these, leaks of transcripts and stuff is really the problem here. But what people are doing, as we've been talking about, is sort of conflating and confusing all these issues. And people at home who are interested in the truth really need to learn the difference between incidental collection and wiretapping. They are not the same thing. Unmasking is not wiretapping. Unmasking is not leaking. And so it allows Trump supporters and allies to build this narrative that there was this wild surveillance of Trump and his associates. There were conversations between FISA targets and other people, perhaps other foreigners or even Trump associates themselves, during which names of Trump campaign officials, et cetera, family members were caught up in this. It's the wide dissemination that is a problem, but potentially a crime. Susan Rice has a credibility problem. Devin Nunes has a credibility problem. So this is very muddied waters here at this point, but it's important for people to know that what Jim points out in his reporting, that this is not only legal, whether people like it or not, but it's not even unusual, is really, that's the fundamental headline here and the bottom line.
So then, Jim, take it one step further for us, what A.B. just raised. Do we know how widely Susan Rice then disseminated the name that she asked to be unmasked or revealed to her?
We don't know that. I mean, this is the thing. It was described to me again by very senior officials. When unmasking happens, it's not like you put out a memo, right, to the entire White House staff. That unmasking happens between the briefer and that senior national security official. Now, is it possible that senior national security official then goes down the corridor and tells someone else in the building or calls a reporter? It's certainly possible. We don't know that at this stage. But the other point I would make is this, is that unmasking cannot one person cannot order unmasking. It requires the intelligence community, in this case the NSA, to agree that that request is material and then to grant that request. And the other point that was made to me was that these things are meticulously logged. One former senior intelligence official said to me, and Chris, you'll appreciate this, they are logged like Irish baptismal records, so you can't do it. You can't do it in the dark. And that's one reason why Devin Nunes was able to go to the White House and look at the request that Susan Rice made. They are meticulously logged, and that's by protocol. That's by law.
And, look, again, you guys are all making great points, and a lot of them are going to bear repeating because we are seeing an intentional deception going on here, Phil Mudd, where you want to take a general issue, which people do have about surveillance. What are you guys collecting there in the spy world? And when is my name up for your own offer within your agency or outside? And what was done specifically here? And to Jim's point, if Rice wanted to leak this, if they wanted to do something sneaky, why would she have gone through the normal challenge of having it unmasked and created a paper trail of her own deception?
Sure, and if you look at this case, let me pick up on what Jim said and take you inside the room. I have been in the room when the FBI director requests the unmasking of a name. Believe it or not, the FBI director can't just determine the name in that intercepted communication. The director of the FBI has to go through that formal process that Jim just identified. So as soon as Susan Rice, presuming this story is correct, asks for that name, she knows that she's going to be entered in a registry that indicates she's made the request. One more point. There was a suggestion earlier that this is an intel community leak. I'm going to wager you, Chris, I'll bet you a beer that some of these leaks are coming from within the White House. That is, there are White House officials who are seeing these records and saying, I want to throw Susan Rice under the bus because that diverts this investigation from Russia. I don't think this is all intel, guys.
Well,
and we know that because one of the connections we see between the White House and outside was the White House inappropriately calling the Congress.
Well, look, me buying you things to eat and drink is going to be nothing new. I don't even know if it counts as a wager. But all you have to do is look at Devin Nunes. He went from saying, oh, no, I got all this independently, to having a direct connection to the White House with the information he wound up putting out. So there's something to what Mudd is saying.
It is a tangled web. Thank you, panel, for helping us sort it out this morning. We have
released several proclamations on Friday that are all available at whitehouse.gov. This morning, specifically, the president proclaimed April 2nd through the 8th as National Crime Victims' Rights Week. On Saturday, the president declared a major disaster in the state of California as a result of severe winter storm flooding and mudslides in February. Federal assistance will be supplementing recovery efforts in the area moving forward. Also on Saturday, the vice president traveled to Columbus, Ohio to discuss American jobs and the economy. He spoke with business leaders at Dynalab, an American-owned, operated electronic manufacturing services company. The vice president told the crowd that the actions that the president has already taken to create jobs in this country make it easier to do business, from taking a serious look at the regulatory process to ushering in a new era of American energy. With respect to today, the president, as you know, welcomed President al-Sisi of Egypt to the White House this morning. The two presidents had an honest discussion focused on areas of cooperation. The president made clear that this is a new day in the relationship between Egypt and the United States, and the president affirmed his strong support of the Egyptian people. It was a candid dialogue during which they discussed both areas of cooperation and of concern. Also this morning, the White House released the official portrait of the First Lady, which is similarly available on whitehouse.gov. And just about now, the president began a meeting with Secretary of State Tillerson, where they're expected to discuss several topics, including the secretary's recent trip to Brussels, where he attended the NATO foreign ministers meeting. As you may have known, just prior to the briefing, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance the president's selection for Neil Gorsuch to the full Senate. While the White House was pleased that beyond the committee partisan vote, more Democrats have moved past partisan obstruction to acknowledge that Judge Gorsuch is simply qualified and deserving of being on the bench. But we're obviously disappointed that the overwhelming majority of them are still playing politics with the nation's highest court. if the Democrats get their way, and I know the numbers are looking that way, this is going to be the first successful filibuster of a nominee to join the Supreme Court, which is clearly unprecedented. With a vote on Judge Gorsuch expected Friday, the American people will see which senators are willing to keep this seat open to get in the way of President Trump making progress on one of his most significant choices so far. Also today opens the application process for this year's H-1B visas. The president has spoken about the H-1B visa program in the past. The White House acknowledges that there are issues with the program as it currently stands. However, there are several laws that are on the books that went unenforced in the previous administration. As the Department of Justice made clear in its release this morning, the Trump administration will be enforcing laws protecting American workers